Greatness doesn't wait. It doesn't ask for permission. And it definitely doesn't forget. In 2024, Caitlin Clark was left off the roster by USA Basketball. While the team packed their bags for Paris, one of the most electrifying players in the world was told to stay home. The basketball world didn't just notice, it exploded. Debates, outrage, disbelief. How do you leave behind a generational talent? But here's what made it different.
She didn't complain.
She didn't lash out. She didn't beg for validation. She remembered. And that memory turned into something far more dangerous than anger. It became fuel. Fast forward to the world stage. The qualifiers weren't just another tournament. They were stacked. Elite talent everywhere. Stars who had already proven themselves. Names that carried weight. Expectations that demanded dominance. And yet, the story didn't belong to the starters. It didn't belong to the veterans. It didn't even belong to the system. It belonged to the one player who wasn't supposed to be there. Caitlin Clark came off the bench and completely took over. 5 games. 5 wins. No debates. No questions. Just results. By the end of it all, there was only one name that mattered, the tournament MVP. And it wasn't even close. The dominance was so overwhelming, so undeniable, that it forced a global conversation. Not about whether she belonged, but about how anyone ever believed they could win without her. But the real story? It goes deeper than stats. Deeper than highlights. Deeper than awards. Because this wasn't just a comeback. This was a statement. There's something almost cinematic about the way Caitlin Clark stepped onto the court in a Team USA jersey for the first time. Not cinematic in a soft, feel-good way, but in the way a perfectly written story delivers its most powerful moment. She didn't start. Of course she didn't. Because the same system that once overlooked her wasn't ready to immediately hand her the spotlight. Even after everything she had already done. Even after becoming arguably the most watched, most talked about, and most impactful player in women's basketball over the previous 2 years. So she sat. She watched. She waited. And that's where Caitlin Clark separates herself from almost everyone else. No frustration. No body language. No ego. Just preparation. Then the moment came. She checked into the game, and within seconds, everything changed. Her first touch wasn't forced. It wasn't rushed. It was controlled, calculated, inevitable. She brought the ball up, read the defense like she had already seen this exact possession play out 100 times before, executed a clean give and go, and delivered a perfect bounce pass for her first assist in a USA jersey. Simple, effortless,
But also terrifying.
because it looked exactly like every assist she's ever made. Like the outcome had already been decided before the play even began. That's who she is. Then came the shooting. Not hesitation. Not nerves. Not overthinking. Just confidence. She moved without the ball, slipped past defenders, created space with precision, and launched a deep shot that barely touched anything but net. And for anyone who thought it was luck, those people clearly hadn't been paying attention. Because with Caitlin Clark, shots like that aren't surprises. They're expectations. But what truly separates her, the thing you won't always see in a box score, is her composure. This was the biggest international stage of her career. The spotlight was blinding. The pressure was massive. The narrative surrounding her was louder than ever. And she looked completely unbothered. Not just calm, almost disturbingly calm. Like none of it mattered. Like she had already been here before. And in every way that counts she had. Then came the orchestration. Because Caitlin Clark doesn't just play basketball. She controls it. She sees angles before they exist. She manipulates defenses before they react. She creates opportunities that shouldn't be there. Pick your defensive strategy. It doesn't matter. Drop coverage? She pulls up and buries a 3 before the defense can even settle. Aggressive hedge? She slips through, reads the chaos, and fires a cross-court pass that hits her teammate perfectly in rhythm. Switch everything? Now you've created a mismatch, and she's already exploiting it. There is no correct answer. Only consequences. And then something even more unexpected happened.
Chemistry.
Players who were once framed as rivals suddenly looked unstoppable together. Angel Reese, a name constantly tied to narratives, debates, and comparisons, became a perfect partner on the court. Screens, cuts, finishes. Clean, efficient, dominant basketball. The noise disappeared. What remained was execution. Then came Paige Buchers, adding another layer entirely. Two elite minds sharing the floor. Ball movement became sharper. Spacing became more dangerous. And Caitlin, free to play off the ball, became even harder to guard. Catch-and-shoot threes. Backdoor cuts. Instant decisions. Every possession felt like a problem no defense could solve. And through it all, one thing became clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't trying to prove people wrong. She was proving something bigger. That greatness doesn't need validation. That talent doesn't disappear when it's ignored. That being overlooked doesn't make you smaller, it makes you sharper. By the end of the tournament, the question wasn't whether she belonged. It was how the game ever moved forward without fully embracing her. Because this wasn't just a performance. This was a takeover. A rewriting of expectations. A collapse of doubt. A reminder to everyone watching, you can delay greatness. You can question it. You can even ignore it for a moment. But eventually, it shows up anyway. And when it does, it doesn't ask. It takes over. And just when it felt like the story had already reached its peak, Caitlin Clark elevated it again, like she was operating on a completely different level of understanding than everyone else on the floor. Plays unfolded around her the way they always have, but now there was something sharper, something more refined, something undeniably complete about her game. When she buried deep shots or threaded impossible passes, it didn't feel surprising anymore. It felt inevitable, like she had been rehearsing these exact moments her entire life. But there's a narrative that has followed Caitlin Clark everywhere, stubborn and persistent, refusing to disappear no matter how many times reality proves it wrong. The idea that she can't defend, that she's a liability, that when the game tightens and possessions matter most, she becomes the weak point opponents can exploit. It's a criticism that started back in her college days and only grew louder when she entered the WNBA, especially during her early adjustment period with the Indiana Fever. Critics pointed to physical matchups, to defensive breakdowns, to moments where the speed of the game challenged her positioning. And at the time, there was at least a conversation to be had. She was learning, adapting, adjusting to a new level. But what those same critics failed to do, what they continue to refuse to do, is update their understanding of who she has become. Because the player that showed up in this tournament wasn't learning anymore. She was hunting. Every defensive possession felt intentional, calculated,
Alive.
She wasn't reacting, she was anticipating. Reading plays before they even formed, moving before the offense could execute, disrupting actions at their very foundation. There was a moment against New Zealand that perfectly captured this transformation. The offense initiated a standard pick and roll, the kind of play that happens countless times in every game. But before the pass was even made, before the ball handler had fully committed to the action, Clark had already diagnosed the entire sequence. She exploded into the play with perfect timing, stripped the ball clean, and took off in transition without hesitation. No gamble. No luck. Just pure instinct backed by elite basketball intelligence. That's not effort. That's understanding the game at a level most players never reach. And then came another sequence, even more subtle, but just as devastating. A rebound secured by the opposition, slightly off balance, looking for an outlet. In that tiny window of indecision, Clark moved. Not after the pass. Not during.
Before.
She cut through the lane like she had already seen the future, intercepted the ball in the paint, and converted effortlessly. Defense turning into offense in a single, seamless motion. That's when it became impossible to ignore. This wasn't the same player people had labeled as a defensive weakness. This was someone weaponizing her mind on both ends of the floor. What makes it even more dangerous is how quietly physical she actually is. It doesn't always show up in highlight reels, but it's there, in her balance, in her control, in the way she absorbs pressure without losing clarity. There's a moment where she found herself surrounded by multiple defenders on the perimeter, a situation where most players panic, pick up their dribble, or force a mistake. Not Clark. She stayed composed, reading all angles at once, manipulating the defenders like pieces on a board, and then, out of nowhere, created her own shot with surgical precision. A controlled, balanced finish that left the defense frozen. Not because they didn't try, but because they simply couldn't process it fast enough. And that's when you're reminded of something people tend to forget. Before she became one of the greatest playmakers the game has ever seen, she was a scorer. Not just any scorer, the all-time leading scorer in NCAA history. That instinct never left her. It evolved. It matured. It became more selective, more precise, more devastating. She doesn't chase moments anymore, she chooses them. And when she does, they land with authority. What made this entire run even more remarkable wasn't just the production, it was the context surrounding it. Limited minutes. Coming off the bench. Carrying the weight of a very public snub by USA Basketball just a year earlier. Playing alongside teammates she had been constantly compared to, sometimes even pitted against. Performing under the microscope of a global audience split between those who believed in her and those waiting for her to fail. And under all of that pressure, she didn't crack. She controlled. 5 games, 0.5 wins. Tournament MVP. Elite efficiency in limited minutes. Numbers that tell one story, but not the whole story. Because what truly defined her performance wasn't just what she did, it was how consistently she did it, regardless of circumstance. Defenses tried everything. Drop coverage became almost laughable by the end. Opponents kept making the same calculation: protect the paint, contain the drive, force her into jump shots. And every single time, she responded the same way. Step back. Space created. Shot released. 3 points. Again and again, across different teams, different systems, different strategies. No adjustment worked. No answer held. Because there is no simple solution to a player who can beat you in every possible way. But beyond the tactics, beyond the X's and O's, there was something deeper unfolding. Something human. Watching Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark share the court, set screens for each other, connect on plays, celebrate success. It meant something. These were 2 athletes whose names had been dragged into narratives far bigger than basketball. Rivalries amplified, comparisons exaggerated, stories shaped by forces outside the game. And yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. They chose to play together, to win together, to trust each other. And it worked beautifully. The same could be said for her connection with Paige Buchers. 2 elite basketball minds operating in sync, creating a fluid, dynamic offense that felt almost impossible to disrupt. Ball movement became art. Decisions became instantaneous. Every possession felt like it was one step ahead of the defense. And through all of it, one undeniable truth kept surfacing. Every minute Caitlin Clark was on the floor, she was the best player in the building. Not sometimes. Not occasionally. Consistently. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just the wins. Not just the MVP. Not even the redemption arc. It's the message. She walked into this tournament with every reason to play selfishly, to prove a point, to make it about herself. Instead, she played the most complete, unselfish, and impactful basketball of her career on the international stage. She elevated everyone around her. She embraced the moment without forcing it. She let the game come to her and then controlled it completely. They left her off the roster in 2024. They brought her off the bench after that. And she still went undefeated. She still dominated. She still walked away as the most valuable player. Because greatness doesn't wait. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need perfect circumstances. And it definitely doesn't need permission. It just shows up and takes over. And now, with the world watching and the biggest stage still ahead, the question isn't whether Caitlin Clark is ready. It's whether everyone else is. Because what Caitlin Clark did in that tournament didn't just win games, it shifted expectations. It forced an entire system, led by USA Basketball, to confront something uncomfortable. Not just that they underestimated her, but that they misunderstood her completely. There's a difference between recognizing talent and truly understanding impact, and for a long time, the conversation around Clark stayed stuck at the surface level. Points, assists, highlights. What this run exposed was something deeper. Control. Total control over the rhythm, the spacing, the psychology of the game itself. Every possession she touched felt like it bent slightly in her direction, like gravity had shifted just enough to favor her decisions over everyone else's reactions. And once you see that, once you understand that kind of influence, you can't unsee it. You start questioning every moment she wasn't on the floor, every game she wasn't part of, every decision that kept her out of the spotlight she now clearly owns. Because let's be honest, the biggest takeaway from this entire run isn't just that she played well. It's that she made it impossible to justify ever leaving her out again. Not quietly, not subtly, loudly, repeatedly, undeniably. Every pass that sliced through a defense, every shot that stretched the floor beyond comfort, every defensive read that turned into instant offense, it all stacked into one overwhelming truth. She changes everything. She doesn't fit into a system. She becomes the system. And that's where the tension begins, because systems don't always like to be changed. Especially not by someone who was once told to wait her turn. But Caitlin Clark doesn't wait anymore. And that's what makes what comes next so fascinating. Because now it's not just about her proving something, it's about everyone else adjusting to her. Coaches, teammates, opponents, the entire ecosystem of the game has to evolve around a player who refuses to be predictable. You can see it already in how defenses approach her. There's hesitation now. A split second of uncertainty. Do you press up and risk her blowing by you? Do you sag back and give her space she doesn't need? Do you trap and leave someone else wide open? Every option feels wrong, and that's not by accident. That's design. That's a player who has mastered the art of putting defenders in positions where any decision becomes the wrong one. And once that kind of pressure builds over the course of a game, over multiple games, over an entire tournament, it breaks teams. Not physically, mentally. That's what makes her so dangerous. It's not just what she does. It's what she makes you think. And when you start thinking instead of reacting, you're already behind. But there's another layer to this story that deserves attention. Something that goes beyond tactics and performance and enters the realm of legacy. Because moments like this don't just define tournaments, they define careers. They become reference points, turning points, the kind of stretch people look back on years later and say, that's when everything changed. And for Caitlin Clark, this feels exactly like that kind of moment. The transition from star to something more, something bigger. A presence that doesn't just exist within the game, but actively shapes where the game is going. You can see it in the way her teammates respond to her.
The trust.
The timing. The willingness to move without the ball because they know it will find them. That kind of chemistry doesn't happen by accident. It's built on belief. And belief at this level is earned. It's earned through consistency, through decision-making, through proving over and over again that when the ball is in her hands, something good is going to happen. Not maybe, not sometimes, almost always. And that kind of reliability becomes contagious. It lifts everyone. It simplifies the game for players around her. It turns good teams into great ones. Which brings us to the future. Because this wasn't the final stage. Not even close. The World Cup is coming. Bigger stage. Higher stakes. Stronger competition. And now, instead of being a question mark, Caitlin Clark enters that environment as a centerpiece. Not a possibility, but a certainty. Not someone fighting for a role, but someone defining it. And that changes everything about how this team will be constructed, how it will function, how it will be challenged. Opponents aren't preparing for a balanced roster anymore. They're preparing for her. Game plans will start with her name and branch out from there. Entire defensive schemes designed just to contain one player. And even then, it might not be enough. Because what do you do with a player who sees the game faster than you can react to it? What do you do with someone whose range extends beyond your defensive comfort zone, whose passing punishes overcommitment, whose patience forces mistakes? There isn't a clean answer. There never has been. And that's why the conversation around her keeps evolving. From talented to elite to unstoppable. And maybe the most powerful part of all of this is how she handled it. No revenge tour. No public frustration. No, I told you so.
Just basketball.
Pure, controlled, dominant basketball. She didn't need to say anything because her game said everything. Every assist was a statement. Every shot was a reminder. Every defensive play was a correction to a narrative that had overstayed its welcome. She let the game speak, and when the game speaks that loudly, people listen. Even the critics. Especially the critics. Because at some point, denial becomes impossible. At some point, the evidence becomes overwhelming. And at some point, the conversation shifts from questioning to acknowledging. That shift is happening right now. You can feel it. In the way analysts talk about her. In the way opponents approach her. In the way fans react to her. The doubt is fading, replaced by something else. Expectation. And expectation is heavier than doubt. Because now it's not about whether she can do it. It's about whether anyone can stop her from doing it again. So as the spotlight grows brighter and the stage gets bigger, one question rises above all the rest. Not, is Caitlin Clark ready? We already have that answer. The real question is the game ready for what she's becoming? Because if this tournament was any indication, we're not just watching a player succeed. We're watching a player take over. And once that kind of takeover begins, it doesn't stop. It expands. It evolves. It rewrites everything. And the next chapter? It might be even bigger than this one.